Here is something most people will never admit to themselves. Every time you over-explained your boundary, you erased it. Every time you apologized for saying no, you trained the other person to push again. Every time you said, "I just need you to understand," you handed them a lever. You were not being kind. You were being afraid. And fear dressed as kindness teaches people exactly the wrong lesson about who you are. The most respected people you have ever met did not fight for their boundaries. They did not build a case. They simply held the line. And when someone crossed it, those people did not yell. They got quieter. This video is about that. The boundary that earns you permanent respect because you only had to set it once. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire of tens of millions from a campaign tent on the Danube frontier. He had senators who despised him, generals who questioned him, philosophers at court who tested every decision he made. He did not convene meetings to address the disrespect. He did not send letters explaining his reasoning. He simply continued to govern. In his private journal, the Meditations never meant to be published, he wrote this to himself. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Notice what is absent from that sentence. No audience, no performance, no demand that others acknowledge the rightness of his position. The boundary Marcus Aurelius set was internal first, and because it was internal first, it never needed to be argued externally. That is the premise this entire video rests on. A boundary that lives in your behavior requires no announcement, but it does require one thing most people are unwilling to give it: consistency. And that is where we begin. Law 1: a boundary announced but not held is just a threat. Every parent knows the moment a child discovers this truth. The parent says, "If you do that one more time," and the child waits, because children are instinctive strategists. They are testing whether the rule is real. So is every adult around you, not maliciously, mostly unconsciously. But they are watching whether what you say matches what you do. When it does not, they file that away, not as a conscious calculation, but as a felt sense. This person can be moved, and once someone believes you can be moved, they will keep applying pressure, because you taught them it works. Marcus writes in the Meditations, "Without pretense." That line is the key. A boundary you announce but do not hold is pretense. And underneath every argument about a violated boundary, both people already know it. Set it. Hold it. Do not negotiate with someone testing whether you are real. But the problem is rarely the boundary itself. The problem is what you believe you owe the person crossing it. Law 2: you owe no one an explanation for a standard you have set. When you set a boundary and someone pushes back, asks why, argues it is unfair, accuses you of being cold, the instinct is to explain, to justify, to make them understand. But the moment you begin explaining, you have accepted a hidden premise, that the boundary is only valid if they agree with it. That is not a boundary. That is a proposal. Epictetus, born enslaved and later one of the most influential minds of the ancient world, understood this with brutal clarity. He had no legal rights. He could enforce nothing, so he located authority somewhere no one could touch. He wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." Your standard for how you are treated, that is within your power. Whether the other person agrees with it is not. State it once, calmly, clearly, without adjectives, without emotion. I don't engage with conversations that go this direction. Full stop. The silence that follows is not awkward, it is authoritative. But there is something almost no one notices about that silence, what it does to the other person's perception of you over time. Law 3. Calmness under pressure is the signal that changes everything. When someone crosses a line and you raise your voice, you have told them something. This affects me. You have handed them information about exactly where your nerve endings are. When someone crosses a line and you go quiet, not icy, not theatrical, just settled, you have told them something entirely different. I have already decided. Your reaction does not change my position. This is not coldness. This is the most sophisticated signal you can send in a moment of social pressure. Marcus Aurelius governed competing factions, corrupt officials, philosophers looking for inconsistency in his edicts. He did not govern through fear. He governed through something harder to manufacture, predictability. People knew where he stood because he stood there every single time. Calm is not passivity. Calm is the demonstration that you resolved this inside yourself long before anyone else entered the room. And that leads to a truth most people miss entirely about what a boundary actually protects. Law 4, a boundary protects your energy, not your ego. Here is the mistake that turns boundaries into battles. When a boundary becomes about being right, about winning, about proving the other person wrong, it stops being a boundary and becomes a conflict. And conflict is expensive. Every argument you win on principle costs you something you never get back. Time, composure, the ability to think clearly afterward. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Retire into yourself as much as you can associate with those who will make a better man of you." The boundary is not a wall you build against people you resent. It is the perimeter around the version of yourself you are trying to protect. When a colleague undermines you in meetings, the boundary is not, "You are disrespectful." It is, "I will not offer my thinking in rooms where it is used against me." Do you feel the difference? One is a verdict about another person. The other is a decision about yourself. Verdicts require defense. Decisions require nothing except your willingness to live by them. But there is one situation where even the strongest people break this rule, and it is not confrontation that breaks them. Law 5, kindness is the test every boundary eventually faces. No one breaks your standards through aggression alone. Not for long. The test that breaks most people is gentler. It is the person who needs you, the one who is struggling, the one who you tell yourself just needs one more exception, and you make the exception. And the lesson they absorb is not, "They care about me." The lesson, felt below the level of language, is, "If I present my needs strongly enough, the rule does not apply." This is the paradox that destroys more good people than cruelty ever has. Your compassion, weaponized against your own consistency. Marcus Aurelius faced generals who presented emergencies requiring him to override his principles. His answer, across dozens of entries in the Meditations, The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. The insanity he describes is not cruelty. It is the slow compromise of principle through accumulated exceptions, each one reasonable in isolation, each one a small erasure of the standard that made you trustworthy. You can be kind and still hold the line. In fact, the kindest thing you can do for most people is refuse to teach them that your limits are negotiable. And now, the turn that reframes everything you have heard so far. Here is what this video has actually been about. We began talking about boundaries, about how to set them, hold them, protect them. But every law we examined pointed somewhere deeper than behavior. They pointed inward. Because the boundary that earns you permanent respect is not primarily about other people at all. It is about the relationship you have with yourself. When you hold a standard in private, you are sending yourself a message. You are telling your own nervous system, I can be trusted. What I decide, I do. What I say to myself, I mean. That internal coherence, that alignment between what you decide and what you do is the actual source of the authority people feel when they are around you. You cannot announce it. You cannot hide it. Marcus Aurelius did not govern tens of millions because he was powerful. He governed them because he governed himself first, visibly, consistently, without drama. The boundary was never about them. It was always a promise he made to himself. You do not need a confrontation. You do not need the other person's agreement. You need one thing. Decide what you will and will not accept, not as a reaction to someone else, but as a reflection of who you are choosing to be. State it once, calmly, hold it, in public, in private, when it is hard, when the exception would be easier, and watch what happens over weeks and months. People do not send you a message saying they have noticed your consistency. They just treat you differently. Because somewhere below the level of language, they have learned something true about you. You are who you say you are. That is the only authority that lasts. Be someone who keeps their word, especially when that someone is yourself.